Hey everyone, it's Anthony from Pretty Printer here. In today's video, I'll be introducing you to the Django web framework for Python. And while I introduce you to this framework, I'll show you how to build a very simple guestbook application using Django. So to understand this tutorial, you just need to know a little bit of Python and HTML, and that should be enough for you to follow along with the tutorial. If you have any questions, of course, like you get stuck with something, then just leave a comment down below and I'll help you out. Another thing you should know is I have created some resources for this video that you can download. So just go down to the links in the description below and you'll see how you can download a Django cheat sheet, which you can reference while developing your Django apps. And also I have a link to the actual demo for what I'm going to create in this video so you can see it running and kind of compare what you build to what I built. And finally, there will be a link to the code so you can look at my code and compare it to the code that you've written if you choose to follow along with the tutorial. So like I said, if you have any questions about the tutorial, you can leave them in the comments below. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.
Okay, so before I get into installing Django and actually creating a Django app, what I'll talk about first is an overview of Django. So Django is a high-level web framework for Python. So a web framework is just a way to create web apps in a particular programming language. So, usually the apps you create can only start off as scripts, but if you add in a web framework, then you can create a web app so people can use their browsers or some tool that can perform HTTP requests and get something returned from it, like a website or some results from an API. And high level simply means that it adds more for you. So it makes it easier for you to develop in it. So it gives you more tools that you can use out of the box. It forces you into certain conventions, and it gives you this great admin section that works right out of the box. And you contrast this with other web frameworks. For example, in Python, you have something like Flask or Bottle. In Node, you'd have Express. In Ruby, you'd have something like Sinatra, and these are micro frameworks. So they don't force you into any particular pattern, and they don't give you that many tools to start off with. They give you a lot more flexibility in what you want to do. And if you don't want to spend time making your app a certain way, you just want to get something done in a few lines of code, then maybe a micro framework will work better. But for a larger project, something like Django starts to work pretty well because it gives you a certain structure to start off with, so it's easier to scale your code. It's easier to understand for multiple developers because there is one convention that you're using. It's not like you're making up the convention when you use something like Flask. So it's easier for others to understand. And because it comes with so many included components, you don't have to make decisions on what to use. You don't have to make decisions on what libraries to include in your web app to make sure you can get certain features. Django covers a lot of that already. Now, of course, there are libraries out there that you can add on to Django, but for the most part, in the beginning, Django has everything you need. So, of course, there are other things, but that's just a basic overview. Instead, I prefer to show you the code. Just know that I'll be using Python 3.5 in this video, and I will be using Django 2.0. But just know that any future releases of Django won't be conceptually different from what I'm going to show you now. It's probably going to be minor changes, like it's going to be a little faster, more secure, maybe a little easier to use, but conceptually, it's going to be the same thing. And it's true for previous versions of Django as well. Like even though in 2.0 they changed something that is going to affect everyone, it's not that big of a change. So I'll show you that when we get to it. So to install Django, you simply run pip install Django. I already have it installed, so I don't have to install it again. But if you want to install it, just run pip install Django. I have a virtual environment running as well, so it's the only thing in the virtual environment. That and its dependencies, of course. So once you have it installed, go to a directory where you want to create a project. So a project for Django is kind of the container for everything that you do. So I have this directory here called Django stuff, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a project. So to create a project, I'm going to run the command django-admin start project, and then a project name. So I'm going to name this my project. And if it returns with no errors, that means everything went well. If I look at my directory now, I have this directory called my project. So if I open up my project, I see another directory called my project and then a file called manage. So what I'll do is I'll load this into Sublime so it's easier to see the files. And I'll go through what these files mean. So the first file is manage.py, and manage.py is what's going to allow us to run commands that are relevant to our Django project. So this allows us to run the development server. It allows us to perform migrations. It allows us to use the shell so we can execute specific parts of our code in the shell. It allows us to create a superuser. And I can't think of anything else, but there are other things that allows you to do. But basically, it's just an interface to using parts of Django directly that can be executed on the command line. So you don't have to change anything about this file. You'll be using the file, but you won't change anything in it. So don't change anything. Otherwise, you might get some undesirable results. Then if I look in my project, I see 4 files. So the first one is init.py or underbar init. And this has nothing in it and is just so my project will be considered a Python package. We have a settings file, which is actually pretty important. We see here it has a secret key, something you don't want to let other people know about when your app is live. We have a debug mode. We have installed apps, which is really important because Django considers apps to be the main components of a project. And then we have other things that really aren't relevant for this introduction tutorial, but I might cover them in other videos. Like for instance, databases. I'll definitely cover that in a future video because databases are very important to web apps. In our particular case though, we're going to be using the default, which is SQLite. And the name is just this location for SQLite. And the reason why I'm using SQLite is because it's very easy to use. But as you build your app and you want to move it to production, perhaps you'll use something like MySQL or Postgres. That's completely up to you. Or you can keep it as SQLite if you don't think your app is going to get that much traffic. So after settings, we have URLs. So this is actually a really important file. And this is going to tell Django where to send requests from the browsers. So if someone were to type in yourwebsite.com/admin like they have here, it will send the user to admin.sites.urls. So I'm not going to cover that part, what this means here, but I'll show you what it means with new apps that we create. But just know that the admin will send them to the admin dashboard. And the nice thing about this in Django 2.0 is it no longer requires you to use regular expressions. So in past versions of Django, you had to use regular expressions to tell Django what path to send people to. So in this particular case, it will look like this kind of. So you put an R in front and then a caret and then maybe a $sign. And the thing about regular expressions is they're very intimidating for beginning programmers, or really just programmers in general. I find like even more experienced programmers don't like using regular expressions unless they have to. They are very powerful, but they are very tricky. They're very hard to read, and it just takes a lot of experience to use them. And especially in something like Django, where if you had parameters that you can pass into a URL, regular expressions could get very complicated very fast. But now in 2.0, they simplified it, so you can just pass in a string, and then Django will match the string and then send the user to a certain part of the app. And of course, I'll show you that in a moment, but that's it for URLs right now. And I'm going to show you the admin in just a second. And then WSGI, just to keep it simple, WSGI is a way to write web frameworks in Python and interface with web servers. So this just is needed so you can actually create a web app in Python. You don't have to change anything here. It's just needed for your project. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to verify that everything is working correctly. So I'm going to cd into my project. And this first my project directory is just a container. You can change the name. But the second my project has to remain the name that you gave it. Otherwise, things will go a little wonky. So to start the server, the dev server, I'm going to type python manage.py and then run server. And then it tells me I have unapplied migrations, which I'll apply in just a moment. And then it tells me where the server is. So it's 127.0.01 port 8000. So if I go here, I see I have this page that tells me that the install has worked successfully. So this is exactly what you want to see. Since I didn't modify anything, you shouldn't have any problems getting to this screen, at least, because this works out of the box. Now what I want to do is I want to work with the admin dashboard. So the first thing I need to do is I need to actually create the migration, or it's created already. I need to migrate the things into the database. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type Python manage.py and then migrate. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a bunch of tables in my database. So what I'll do is I'll open up the SQLite database that gets generated. So first, let me show you. Here on the left-hand side of the projects, you see this db.sqlite3 has been created. Once I run migrate, it looks at the databases. It sees what database I want to use. In this particular case, it's SQLite. So it creates that database, and then it adds the migrations to it, which means it just creates the tables in the database. So I have a viewer for the database on my other screen that I'm just opening right now. So now let me move it over. This is just a GUI for a SQLite database. You can use another one. If you're using something like MySQL or Postgres, then you'd have another thing. But basically all I'm using this for is just to show you how I have different tables to begin with, even though I haven't done anything in my project. So I see like Django session, auth user, auth permission, Django content type. It's not too important what these do, but you just need to know that Django has created some tables for you in the beginning. So now what I want to do is I want to go to my site and go to /admin. And I need to start up the server again. So Python manage.py run server. Otherwise, I get a error, unable to connect. So once it starts running, I can refresh this. And I see a Django administration screen. Now, it's asking for a username and password, and I don't have that yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one. So I'm going to say Python manage.py and then create superuser, all one word. And it's going to prompt me for some information. So the username I'll leave as Anthony. Add in an email address. So anthony@prettyprinted.com. A password. Let's see if I can come up with a complicated enough password. If you come up with a password that's too common, then it will tell you. But the password that I created is fine. So now let me show you what happened to the database really quick. If I just reload this and then go to, let's see, auth user, or where is it? There's one of these that I need to look at. So auth user. Okay, here we go. So you see there's a row that has been created in the database. The username is Anthony. The email is anthony@prettyprinter.com. Gives me a date, gives me is superuser and all that. And it basically confirms that the superuser was added to the database. So now if I run Python manage.py and then run server, I don't see the migrations there anymore because I applied them. If I refresh and type in my username and then a password, I get logged in. So this is the Django admin screen. And before I get into anything else, just know that this is responsive now. So in 2.0, they made this responsive, so you see how it all squishes together as I make things a little smaller. I actually have an example of the old one. So this is from Django 1.10, I believe. And if I try to make this smaller, if I can find a little thing, it's not. Okay, there we go. You can see it's not responsive like the one I just did. So that's a nice change that they made in 2.0. So just wanted to demonstrate that. And now if I look at users, I see my user, Anthony, email address, anthony@prettyprinter.com. And if I go back, I see groups. There's no groups because I haven't added any. But these two tables are what I get in the beginning without having any new code in the project. This is all the default Django stuff. So I'll get back to the admin dashboard later when I'm working on the guestbook app, but just know that this is a really nice place for us to interface with our models directly. So I can make changes here and update the database, and then those will be reflected in the app some way. And this is nice because in a lot of cases, you don't have to make backend admin screens for your app. So if you were creating, let's say, a blog app, you wouldn't have to create a section where an author can type in a blog post and post it. They can just use the admin dashboard, and you can restrict their permissions in such a way that they can only add blog posts. They can't do something like change the name of the blog. So whatever you want here, it's nice because it's right out of the box. You don't have to do anything extra to get this. So now if I go back to the app, what I want to do is I want to create a new app. So the name app is a little confusing when it comes to web development, because normally when we think of app, we think of like the final product. So you go to some URL, you access it, and that is the web app itself. But in Django, an app is actually considered a component of what we view as a web app. So to give you an example, you can go to one site, and this one site will have a store, it will have a blog, it will have a form, and it will have a contact form. You can view all four of those things as being part of the same web app, or in Django, you can view them as separate components. So you can view the blog as standalone, you can view the store as standalone, you can view the contact form as standalone, and you can view the form, the blog, the contact form, and the store. So you can view all those as being separate. And the nice thing about Django is they are pretty self-contained. So if you wanted to just move one part to another web app, then you can easily do that. So let's say you have two web apps that are similar, and they both have forms on them. So one, you have a form talking about cars. One, you have a form talking about music. You can use the same form app from one of your projects and get the same result. You wouldn't have to create it all over again because it's pretty easy to move around. So that's what I mean by app. I know it's pretty confusing, but that's the name that they gave us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new app, and this app is going to do something in my project. So I'm going to create a simple Hello World app. So Python manage start app. So instead of start project, it's start app. And I'm going to add hello. And if you looked on the left-hand side, you see it added hello as a directory. So if I open that, I have a migrations folder, which will hold any future migrations. At the moment, there's nothing in it except for init.py, which is empty. And then there's another init.py, empty as well. Admin, this allows you to register models so you can see them on the admin dashboard that I just showed you. So we'll get to this during the guestbook application, but for the Hello World one, we won't need that. Apps allows you to change some configuration about your apps. Models allows you to add models for your database to map, Python code to actual tables in the database. Nothing for this Hello app is going to go here, but for the guestbook app, there will be something. Tests are to test particular parts of your app. I won't cover tests in this video, but I will cover tests in a future video. Just know that if you want to write tests, that's where you would put it. And then views is pretty important. Views is where the URLs file is going to send the process after someone goes to a particular endpoint. So for example, in the URLs that I showed you already, we have the admin. It's going to send them to admin.site.url. So we don't get to see that, but when we add our own URL pattern, we're going to be sending to our views, or at least we're going to access our views from our URLs file. So I'll show you that in just a moment as well. So to get started, let's work with views first. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to import something. So let me just get rid of this. I'm going to import HTTP response. So I'll get back to render, but for this one, I'm going to keep it simple, and I'm going to use HTTP response, which just returns something to the screen. So from Django.http is what I need to import from. I'm going to import HTTP response, and this allows us to create a response that gets returned after someone accesses a certain endpoint. So I'm going to call this index, and for every view function that you have, it needs to pass in the request. So it needs to have a parameter called request, and Django will automatically pass that in there. I won't be doing anything with the request, but just for convention, it needs to be there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to return the response. So normally you do have some kind of processing here that does something with the request data, but in this particular case, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to directly return a response. So return HTTP response and then some text. So hello world. And what this simply means is when it gets to the return statement, this is what gets returned to the browser. And in our case, it's an HTTP response. So it's like the most generic response that we can get. But of course, this can be like a template that we want to render. This can be some JSON data that we want to output. But like I said, in this case, we're going to keep it simple. So just a response, a HTTP response that says hello world. So now that I have that, what I need to do is I need to create another urls.py file. And instead of the urls.py file in my project, I'm going to put it in hello. So call this urls.py. And what I'm going to do in this urls.py is first I'm going to import path like I have here. So let me just copy and paste that, because it's pretty much the same process when it comes to that. And then I also want to import the views that I have. So from period, so from the same package, import views. So that's just loading everything from this file. I'm going to use the URL patterns. So it's going to be just like this. So instead of typing it, I'll just copy it. And I'm not going to use the admin path. So let me just get rid of that. But I will use path. And the path that I want is, let's say, hello. So hello slash. So the trailing slash is convention in Django, but you don't have to have it. And then what I'm going to add is include from Django URLs. So include, or excuse me, I don't want include yet. I'm getting ahead of myself. Actually, what I want is the views function. So index. So the second thing I pass is views.index. And then I can also give this a name so it can be referenced later elsewhere in the code. So I'll just call this index. So what this is going to do is anytime hello gets matched from the request, it is going to send that request to views.index. And then that request will get loaded here. And then the response will be returned once this is done executing. So I'll save that. And now I'll go over to this URL. So this is the URLs for my project. So it's kind of like the main URLs file. So it starts here and it starts looking for things here. And then it goes to the URLs that I specify in my individual apps if I tell it to do so, which I will. So I'm going to call this path. And I'll leave this blank as the index, or I can put this as hello. I'll do both just to show you what happens, but I'll leave this as blank. So blank just means nothing. And then I'm going to call include. So include. And what this is going to do is it's going to include URLs from a different app. So the different app is hello in this case. So I type in the name of the app, so hello, and then the name of the file, which is URLs. So once I have those two things, I can run the app and see what happens when I go to hello. So just so you know what happens here is it's going to be checking to see if something that I typed into the browser has either admin or blank. If it has admin, it's going to send me to the admin dashboard. If it's blank, it's going to send me to hello.urls. Then it's going to open up the URLs for hello, and then it's going to do the same process. So then it's going to be looking for hello. If it finds hello, it's going to match and send you to views.index. If it doesn't find hello, then it will start complaining. So if I go to manage.py run server, we can test this out. So if I take away the admin and just go to the index, I get an error because it's telling me that there are only two URLs possible in my app, admin and hello. And since I didn't supply either one of those, it's giving me a 404. But if I go to /hello, I see the hello world that I typed in. So now we know that Django knows how to send the users whenever they go to /hello. And I can do this in reverse. I can do something like make this blank, and then I can make this hello. And it will do the same thing. So if I change that and save, the server actually starts by itself. So if I go to hello again, it tells me that it's looking for a hello, hello. So now I know I didn't save the URLs. So go to hello again. And what happens here is it matches on hello. and then it matches nothing after hello. So I need to restart the server again because it's not picking up that second change that I made. So if I just go to hello again, I get hello world. So that's one of the funny things about automatically reloading the server. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So if you are pretty confident in the change you made, but it doesn't work, try restarting the server manually because that happens all the time and it can be a little annoying. You don't want to be in a situation where you make a change and the server restarts, but you don't see that change reflected and you believe that the server picked it up and you go and try to debug your code when really it's the server's fault. It's not your fault. So that's one thing you want to check, especially when dealing with templates and static files. You might have to restart the server. But if I change this to something like hi, and let's see, the server should have restarted. It just did. Hopefully this works without having to restart manually. Yeah, so hi works now. And if I go to hello, it should stop working because it's looking for hi. So generally speaking, you want to give the path here in the URLs for your My Project a unique name, but it can also be the index. It just depends on how you want to organize your app. It's not too important. You just have to pick a method of organizing the app. You can do it either way. You can make this the index and then, add the path here, or you can make this the index and add the path here. And just know for future apps, if you do make one of them the index, then the other apps can't be on the index as well. You have to make up your mind about what you want, or you'll get confused and Django will get confused. So that's just the basic Hello World app. And next what I'll do is I'll get into how to create the guestbook app, which is a much more interesting app to make in Django. Okay, so now let's start by creating a more interesting app. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to type python manage.py start app, and then we'll call this guestbook. So once that happens, we'll see that I have a new directory called guestbook here. So I'm going to be working on that. And before I forget, let me go to settings and add guestbook to installed apps. So if I put guestbook here, that's going to allow Django to find certain things about that guestbook in our directory. I didn't have to use it with hello because I was using it in a very straightforward way with just a single URL. But for anything more complicated, like to use templates or static files, you'll need the installed app here. So I'm adding guestbook here, and then I just added hello there for consistency purposes. But like I said, we obviously don't need hello because I was able to use it without it. So now I'll go back to my guestbook, and it has created pretty much the same files. And what I want to do with the guestbook is I have some HTML here. So let me open this up. So I have two files. I have a file called index.html, and then I have a file called sign.html. And this is what makes up my guestbook app, or what will make up my guestbook app. And the reason why I'm doing it this way is because for me, it's a lot easier to work with created index or created HTML files to start with, because I know what my app is going to look like. And in a sense, I can make my app come alive by modifying this template. If I were to type HTML as I was going along, then I'd be focusing on how the app works and how it looks at the same time. And it's actually better for tutorials because HTML takes a long time to write. So it'd be a waste of time to write all the HTML necessary to view this. So let me just show you what the HTML looks like. So if I just open it in Sublime. Yeah, so I'm assuming everyone watching this video knows how to write HTML. So it's just pretty standard HTML here. And same thing here. And it's what, 40 lines of code and 42. So about 80 lines of code. It would just take too long to type out in a video. So instead what I'll do is I'll convert those templates to be used in my web app. So the first thing I need to do is I need to create a directory called templates, and that's where I'm going to store those HTML files, because the HTML files are going to go from being plain HTML to templates, which means that they have some extra functionality in them so you can make them dynamic in a sense. And this will make more sense once I actually start adding the dynamic parts. But I need to create a folder called templates in my guestbook directory. And then inside of templates, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another directory called guestbook. And the reason why I'm doing this is because What Django does is it's going to take all the templates from all the apps that you have in a particular project, and it's going to combine them into one big templates file. And if you have template files that have the same name, like index.html, then you're going to run into problems with files being overwritten. But if you put a subdirectory inside of your templates directory that's the same name as your app, then it's a lot easier for you to know where those files are and they won't get overwritten. So that's why I did that. So with that, I'm going to go to guestbook and then templates guestbook, and I'm just going to transfer those two files over. So index and sign. So now that I have those template files inside of my project directory, I want to actually view them when I go to a URL. So to do that, I'm going to open up the views for guestbook. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple of views for the guestbook, and those will return each one of the templates. So the index view is going to return the index template, and the sign view is going to return the sign template. So what I'll do is create a function called index, and this is going to be similar to the one for hello. So we see hello, so index requests. But instead of returning HTTP response, which is like the most generic one, I'm going to return a template. So to do that, return, and then this render that's already been imported for me, I'm going to call. And what I need to do is I need to pass in the request. So that's the first argument. The second argument is the name of my template. So guestbook/index.html. And then the third is going to be a context, which I'll get to later, but I'll leave it blank for now. And then for the sign, I'll do the same thing. So request, and then return render request. And let's see, we have guestbook/sign. Okay, so I have guestbook/sign. And now what I need to do is I need to create a URLs file for guestbook. So I'll create a new file here, and I'll call this urls.py. Let me go ahead and close the one for hello, just so I don't confuse myself. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the URLs for my project. And since it's going to be similar, what I'll do is I'll copy this part. So from the URLs down, just so I don't have to type it again. So I still need the path. Obviously, I won't have admin. And then I won't have admin.site URLs. So the first URL that I'm going to use is going to be blank, meaning like the index. So what I'm going to do for the patterns in the project is I'm going to add a guestbook path. And then I'm going to include, and this file got overwritten, so this should be include hello.urls. And then this is going to be include guestbook.urls. Okay, so now that I have the guestbook URLs, anytime I go to /guestbook, it's going to send me to this URLs file, and I can close this out because I won't be needing it anymore. So on the index for guestbook, I'm going to direct the user to views.index, and I'm going to name this index. And then same thing, when they go to sign, I'm going to direct them to views.sign, and I'm going to name this URL sign. So with that, that should be enough to see it when I load this. So Python manage py run server. And include is not defined. So yes, something got overridden when I was doing this. So I'll just add the include here. That's the minor error. So when I do that again, it should tell me that unable to connect because I need to restart the server. Oh, and then in my views here, my URLs, I need to import all the views that I have. So from .views import, or from this import views. I just want all the views that I have. All right, so now if I run the server, it should work a little better this time. Okay, so it's telling me that I have access to the guestbook. And now I see the guestbook page here. and I see the sign page here. If I click on this link, I get an error because there is no link to the sign-in page or the sign page. So what I'll do is I will go to my template, open up the sign file, and look for that link. So that link is, or actually it's in the index. So that link is pointing to sign.html, but I want it to point to the URL that is in my Django app. So to do that, I'm going to use the first of the commands that I can call in the Django template language, and that is URL. So by passing URL in here and a name of URL, so sign, what Django is going to do is it's going to find this, and it's going to be like, okay, find the URL for sign. It's going to look at URLs, and it's going to generate that URL for me. So if I run this again, click the link, it now takes me to the sign the guestbook page. Now, of course, you probably notice how ugly this is. This doesn't look like the templates that I showed you before, and that's because I need to have these static files. So I'm going to create a new directory called static. And then in this directory, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to create guestbook. And then inside of guestbook, I can add the static files that I need. So I'll go out here and I'll go to static, and I will transfer the CSS files. So theme, sign, bootstrap theme, and then bootstrap.min. And I can close that because I'm done with it. And then inside of the index, what I want to do is first I want to tell Django that I will be referencing static files in that directory. So at the top of the template, I can just call load static, and that is going to make those static files available for me. And I'll do that in the sign as well because it's pretty much the same thing. So I'll just copy and paste. And then what I need to do is I need to actually load the static files in my links here. So what I'll do is I'm going to run curly bar % and then static, and then I need to give it a location of the static file. So guestbook/bootstrap.min.css, and then close it out. So one note about these curly brackets and %, that is just telling Django that this is not pure HTML. Instead, you need to evaluate what is ever in between those. So there are two forms. There is curly bracket %, and then there's double curly bracket, and I'll get to double curly bracket later, but curly bracket and then % just means that a command is to follow and then it needs to do something. So it's almost like you're calling a function inside of your template. So this is not HTML, but once the page gets generated by Django in the end, it is HTML. So that's what gets returned to the actual user. But when you're writing the code, you use the commands. So guestbook, just like that. And then one more. So static file, it's going to be guestbook/theme.css. Okay, so those are the 3 static files for that one. So if I refresh, and I may have to restart the server for this one. So let me just restart the server and then refresh. Okay, so now it looks a lot better. So if I go to the sign one, I'm going to do the exact same thing. So I already have static loaded here. So static, and then guestbook/bootstrap.min CSS. And then just one more. So static, guestbook. And just note that the location of the template needs to be in quotes. It's like I'm passing a string to the function static in a sense. So if you didn't have the quotes around it, it would think it's another function you're trying to call, and then you would get an error because it wouldn't be able to find it. So now if I go here, I see the sign page looks good as well. So now that I have that, the next thing that I want to do is I want to work on the guestbook, and I want these comments to actually come from the database. So to have comments come from the database, of course, I need to do something in the database first. And what that something is I'm going to create a model. So if I go to my models files, let me close some of these. If I go to models.py, I'm going to create a model for a comment. And basically what a model is in a web framework is a mapping between some Python code and tables and rows in an actual database. So you can think of the database as being like a physical thing, like it's something on a disk, and then the code is something that is more abstract. So to connect the two, you have a model. So anything you change in the code will automatically be reflected on the database, on the disk somewhere. And anything on that disk can be accessed in your code. So it's kind of a liaison between the two. And anything you do to one will affect the other. So if there weren't models, then you would have to write code to access the database very directly. But with the model, Django is going to take care of the heavy lifting for you. So to create a model, what I'm going to do is create a class. And this class is going to be the name of the table that I want to create. So in this particular case, I want to create a table called comment. And then I'm going to inherit from models.model. And this will just inject some of the model functionality into this class, so it's not just a regular class. And then for this class, the attributes of the class will represent the columns in the database. So for a comment, what I want is, at a minimum, I want a name column, so who wrote the comment. I want an actual comment column with the text of the comment. And then I also want a date added column just so I can sort the comments by date. If I didn't have the date, then I wouldn't be able to sort them by the date added. I may be able to sort them by the ID that gets generated automatically, but a date is a little more reliable one. And just to note on the ID, so for each model that you create, an ID column is going to be generated automatically for you, and it's going to be auto increments. So like the first comment will be 1, the second comment will be 2, 3, 4, and so on. But you don't have to do that yourself. Django takes care of that for you. So now, like I said, the attributes will be the columns. So the first column is name. So to make this a column, I'm going to call models.carField. And what this basically means is this is going to be a column that takes in some characters. And if you look at the cheat sheet, you'll see some of the other fields that you can use. And I can pass in something like max length, just saying that this particular name can't be any more than 20 characters. And then I'll have a second one, and I'll call this comment. And instead of a car field, I'll use a text field. And this just means that I can pass in as much text as I want. But they both have text. It's just car field is limited by 20 characters and text field can be as many as I want. So if someone has a really nice comment to leave on the guest book, then they can type all they want. And then finally, I'll add a date added. So models.datetime field is the field that I want to use. And then for this particular one, I want the time to always be added for me. So I'm going to set a default here, and I'm going to set that default to whatever the time is. So to do that, I'm going to import from Django.utils, import time zone, and then I'm going to call that timezone.now, and that's going to put whatever time it is at the time of creating each comment into this date added column automatically. So if I save that, I now have access to that comment. And now what I want to do is I want to go to the admin part, and I'm going to register that comment model on my admin. So from .models, import comment. And then what I want to do is I want to say admin.site.register. And I'm going to pass in comment. So what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to modify the comments on the admin dashboard. So if I save this and then quit and start the server again, I will go to my admin dashboard, and I'm logged in already. And I see here, I see my app name, so guestbook, and I see comments. And now it's telling me that I get an error, no such table guestbook comment. So I have it on my admin dashboard, but for some reason it's not letting me do this. And the reason why it's not letting me do this yet is because I haven't actually created that table in my database. So to create the table in the database, what I need to do is I first need to make a migration. So a migration is just code that Django will follow to generate something in a database. So to do this, I will type Python manage.py and then make migrations. And once I do that, I will have this new migrations file. And if you look down here, you will see the columns that I added. So an ID that was created for me automatically, like I said, and then a name, a comment, and a date added. So this is basically telling Django how to create a table in the database. And then if I go and type manage.py migrate, it's going to actually run this migration and create it in the database. So now let me load up the table in Jade so we can see it. So let me drag this over. And if I look here, I see guestbook comment. And I see there's nothing in it, but I see that there's the name of my table and the name of my app in there. So I'll close out this. And let me close out that views hello. I don't need the admin.py. Let me just get rid of some of these files because it's getting to be a bit much. Settings I can close. And yeah, okay. So I'll start up my server again. So Python manage.py run server. And now that I have the comment table actually in my database, the screen works. So I can add a comment. I can say my name is John and this is the first comment. You see the date is added automatically for me and I hit save and it adds the comment to the database. I see comment object 1. That's pretty ugly. So what I want to do is I want to add a string representation of my comment. So I'll go back to my models. And if I add a stir function, so 2 underscores, stir underscore underscore again, self, whatever I return from here will be shown here. So what I'll do is I'll say something like name is blank, ID is blank, and then I'll format this with self.name and self.id. And ID is not here, but remember it's there implicitly because I'm importing from models.model. So if I save this and then refresh, my server should have restarted. I see name John, comma, ID 1. So if I add another one, Anthony, this is a comment from Anthony, hit save. Then I see 2 comments in my database. So now what I want to do is I actually want to view these comments when I go to my guestbook. So right now I just see name and then some fake Latin text. I actually want this to be a list of all the comments that I have in the database. So it should say something like John, and then this is the first comment. And then you'll see another one that says Anthony, and then, the comment that I put in for Anthony. So to do this, I will go to my views again, and I'm going to add some code to the index view. So the first thing that I want to do is I first want to get the comments that I have in the database. So I'm going to create a variable to hold them called comments. And to get the comments from the database, I'm going to reference the comments model. So from .models, I'm going to import comment. So that's just the model that I created here. And then to do this, I'm going to call comments and then objects. So now I'm asking for the objects in the database and I want to order them by something. So to order them by something, I pass in the column that I want to order by, in this particular case, date added, and I added the minus in front of it. So I'm ordering in reverse chronological order. So the latest comments to get added will be displayed first. If I took away that minus, then it would do it at the earliest comment created to the latest. So that's the difference between those. And now that I have the comments, I want to pass these comments to the template so I can then display them in the template. So I'm going to create a variable called context. And this context name is by convention. And this just simply means all the variables that will be available for my template. So I'm going to create the key as comments. And then I'm going to pass in the actual list of comments. And then it will be the third argument to my render. So when I pass this context to the template using render, I'll have access to all the values here. So if I reference comments inside the template, it's actually giving me this list of comments that I get here, which is the list of things from the database. So if I open up the template again for index, I will then have access to all those comments. So to do this, I need to look at my HTML and figure out what I want to do. Well, I see I have a name and I have the comment here. And what I want this to do is repeat for each comment in the database. So to repeat something, I'm going to put a loop around it. So inside the template, I can run the for command. So for something. So in this case, I'll say for C in comments. So that comments comes from the context that I just created. So for each comment in comments, which is going to be C, you're going to do something. So I'll just end the for loop down here by calling in for. And it's going to generate this name and this text for each comment. So if I save that and run it, I have 2 comments in the database. So you see it gets repeated twice. Well, I don't want it to be this placeholder text. I want it to be the actual text from the database. So to do this is actually pretty simple. Instead of having name, I'm going to use the double curly brackets this time, and I'm going to put a variable in there. So c.name. And the c.name is going to represent each name that is from a row in my database. So if I refresh this, I see Anthony and John. So as you can imagine, to get the actual text is going to be pretty similar. It's going to be c.comment. And this is going to be the actual comment from the database. And I see this is a comment from Anthony, and then this is the first comment. So you see it's loading all the information from the database that I'm requesting, and it's putting it there. So this is where the dynamic part comes into play, and this is what I mean by making the template come alive. So it's a lot easier to do when you know what you want your apps to look like ahead of time. And basically, you just change the functionality step by step until it's working correctly. So now that the home guestbook page is done, what I want to do now is I want to work on the sign the guestbook page. And the sign the guestbook page is going to be a little more complicated, but it's still fairly straightforward. So what I need to do is I need to create something that represents a form, and then I need to get that form data when they hit the sign button, and I need to put it into the database. So if I go back to my project here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file called forms.py. And as you can imagine, this is where my forms are going to be. So forms are going to be somewhat similar to models in the sense that a class represents something in HTML. Just like the class represents a database table, in this case, a class is going to represent an HTML form, and this class is going to give me extra functionality to use the form in different ways, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So in this forms file, what I'm going to do is say from Django import forms, and I'm going to create a new class. I'm going to call this class comment form so it doesn't conflict with the existing comment model that I have. I'm going to inherit from forms.form. And then similar to the model, for each part of the form, so for each input, I have 2 inputs, name and comment. I'm going to create an attribute, so name, and then there's going to be a comment one that follows. So for this one, I'm going to use forms.carfield, and so far everything is very similar to the models, but this is where it's going to diverge. So max length is going to be 20. And then when I add a comment, forms car field. So now I'm not going to use a text field. Instead, I'm going to use a car field again because it's slightly different because it's a form, even though it's still similar to a model. And for this, I'm going to use a widget because I don't want this to represent a regular text input. I want it to represent a text area. So that's the difference between the two. So it's going to take in a widget, and this widget is going to be forms.textArea. Okay, so far that's all I need for my form. And what I'll do is I'll go back to the views and I'm going to allow my template to have access to that form that I just created. So if I go to the sign view here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to instantiate the form. So first I need to import it from forms. So comment form, and I'm going to instantiate it here. So comment form. And that's basically just creating the form. And then I'll create a context. So form. So I can pass that form to my template. And then inside of my sign.html file, what I'll do is I'll simply just display that form somewhere just so we can see what it looks like. So it's a variable, so just form like that because it's in the context. And now if I refresh this, and may need to restart because it's a template file and there's occasionally problems with it. Okay, so now I see I have a new form. I have a name and I have a comment. Obviously, it's pretty ugly, but we can see that by just adding that form there, I'm able to get a second form on the page. But that's not what I want my form to look like. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to simply convert these fields to be the form fields that I have here. So I'll remove this form. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to reference the inputs directly. So for this one, this is going to be the name. So I'm going to call form.name. And then for the text area, it's going to be similar. It's going to be form.comment. So I'll save that. And now let's take a look at what it looks like. Now it's a little closer to what I want. I have the name from the existing HTML template. I'll remove that momentarily. And then I have the two inputs, the regular text input and the text area. But they don't have the right style. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that they do have the right style. And to do that, I'm going to go back to the form. So forms.py. And to add like custom CSS attributes. So if I look here, I see with my input, I have a form control. And if I just take a look at the source for this, and let's see, zoom in, you see I have two inputs. I have the first input, which is the input for the template, which came with the HTML. And then the second one is the HTML from the form generated by Django. And the same thing for text area. So to modify this, I'll go to forms. And for the character field, what I want to do is I want to create a widget. So widget. And then this widget is probably going to take up more than one line. So this widget is going to be forms.textArea, or no, actually forms.textInput. And with this text input, I want to pass some attributes to it. So attrs is the parameter name to pass some attributes. And I'm simply going to pass a dictionary with all the attributes of the input that I want to pass. So I want to pass a class, and I want to pass a placeholder. So this is just using what I already have in my template. So the class is going to be form control, and the placeholder is going to be name. So class, and then placeholder, I can just type in name, just like that. So now with that, if I refresh, I now have the same thing twice. But this one is just like a static one, but this one is the actual Django one. So I can remove the original one from sign. So I'll just remove this input. And this form.name is going to represent the input created by Django because that's the one that I can actually use. And then I'll do the same thing for the other one. So I already have the widget here, so I can just pass in the attributes. And the dictionary is going to be pretty much the same, except instead of name placeholder, it's going to be comment. So I'll refresh this, and I see another comment form. It's a little bigger, but that's okay. And I'll remove the text area. Okay, so now I'm closer to having my form done, but there are some other things I have to take care of. So the form here, I need to make the method be posts. They're going to be posting data. And then the action for the form is going to be the URL for sign. So this sign is going to handle both GET requests and POST requests. By default, it handles GET requests. And then in the case that it's a POST request, it is going to process the form. So it's going to generate the URL for sign here using a POST request when the form gets submitted. And one last thing I need to add in here is the cross-site request forgery token. So that's just for security purposes. And the form won't work if I don't have that. So basically, that just verifies that the form data is coming from the page that generated the form. It's not coming from someone else who is just passing form data to your route directly. Instead, it's going to make sure it's coming from that particular form. So I just need to add that there. And now let's see what happens when I try to submit the form. So I just type in something here, hit sign, and it redirects me to the same page. So it actually did post the form, but since I'm not handling the post, it doesn't actually do anything. So to handle the post, I need to go back to the my views file and take care of the case when the form is posted. So to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if request.method equals post, I'm going to do something. So we're finally using that request that gets passed in to the view. So if it is a post request, what I'm going to do is I'm going to instantiate the form again, but instead of instantiating the form with nothing, I'm going to instantiate it with the data that comes from the request. So by typing request.post, I'm going to be passing that form data into this comment form. And then what I can do is I can say if this form is actually valid. So if all the data that I want is there, I'll just say form is valid. I want to do something with that data. And before I do that something, I'll cover the else case. So else means it's a GET request. So if it's not a POST request, it's going to be a GET request. I want to instantiate the form. And then after this form is instantiated, whatever form gets generated, either the one with the post data or the one without it, it's going to get passed to the context and then passed to the template. So it just depends on what method. So once I'm in the is valid part, that means that the form has valid data. It works. The token is correct. What I want to do is I want to take the data that was passed into the form and I want to create a new row in the database using that data. So to do that, I'm going to create a variable called new comment. And then I'm going to instantiate the comment from my model. And I'm going to pass in a name. So the name is going to be the name from the request. So if I type request.post and then use the dictionary notation to get the name, I'll get the name that was passed into the form. And then if I do the same thing for comments, so request, post, comment, that will create a new comment object with the post data. So whatever name and comment that I post through the form, I will create a new object for that. And then that object represents a row in the database. To actually save it to the database, I need to call new comment, which I just created, save. And that will take the data that is saved, or take the data that is passed into the comment here and save it to the database, thus creating a new row in the database. And then once I'm done here, I want to exit out of this view because I don't need to do anything else. And what I want to do is I want to redirect them to the index. So to redirect, I need to import another shortcut. So redirect, return, redirect, if I spell that correctly. And then I just need to reference the name of the view that I want to redirect to, in this particular case, index. And then it should redirect me to the index when I'm done. So now let's test this out and see if it works. So I'll reload sign. Let's say name Kelly. Here is a comment from Kelly. So sign. It redirects me to the index and I see Kelly here. Here's a comment from Kelly because we already modify the guestbook page to actually load everything from the database. So when I sign, it's adding it to the database. And when I get back to the guestbook page, it is showing me everything in the database. So it just works right away. So Zach, I really like your app, sign, and I see Zach appear there. So it doesn't matter how many I add, it will continue to show here. So there's a lot of stuff that I didn't cover, of course, because Django is such a fully featured framework, but these are the basics. There are other things I can do. I can make sure the validation works when I submit the form. I can verify that, I have correct data that I'm inserting into the database. I can modify a view so I can use like a generic view to make things a little easier for me. There are a ton of things that I can do, and I hope to cover all those things in future videos, but I don't want to make this video go on forever trying to cover everything. But this is just the basics of how to get a Django app up and running. So from this video, you should know the basics of Django, and you should be able to start by working on your own apps. Like I said, I'll have future videos on Django, so hopefully those will help you as well. Like I said, you can download the cheat sheet that can help you with the models when you are creating those, because models are very important to a web app. And that's about it. So if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you have subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe, because I will have more Django videos out. Make sure you go to the resources page to look at the demo, to download the code. You can download the cheat sheet, like I said. And that's about it. So thank you for watching this video, and I will talk to you next time.